Welcome back to Transmission. I'm Sammy Cameron. Tonight I'm joined by Simona, Gem and Grace. Thank you for joining us tonight. When did you first have feelings that the gender you were assigned at birth doesn't really match how you feel?
Oh, I think almost as far back as I can remember, but certainly like from the age of sort of 4 or 5, I just didn't seem to really quite fit in with all the other boys, because I was born a boy and was sort of growing up in that sort of environment, and I just sort of, things just didn't quite gel, and I sort of could see that I'd much rather, at times anyway, be with the girls, because I felt like I was sort of one of them as well. So it was a little bit confusing, to say the least.
Gem?
I was kind of, it's not that I felt, I guess, that I didn't fit in, but I kind of felt really in the middle and very stuck with maybe do I go this way or do I go that way. So although I maybe identified maybe around same age 4, it didn't seem to have such a strong impact. I was okay just being in the middle, but knowing that I wasn't that gingerbread cutty cooker kind of thing.
How about you, Simona?
Well, yeah, I think like 4. I remember putting on my stepsister's tennis skirt in the caravan of a holiday in Surfers Paradise, and my stepmother busted me, and I just like immediately just saw her at the other end of the caravan and just like ripped it off and just ran through a caravan park as long as I could. I mean, the interesting thing was that I judged myself. She didn't judge me, but I'd been watching like I guess like a. It was just the start of the 80s, and like New Romantic was like such a.
So what were some of the feelings of? Did you feel shame and embarrassment?
Yeah, I think it was because it was. I mean, for me, kind of just through watching music video, like there did seem to be this fluidity in gender, but everyone kind of in the lounge room, whether it be parents or school, were, that's Simple Minds, they look like a pack of faggots, and so it was sort of like, I'd be really sort of scared about what my innate instincts were, so when I got to doing them was like a real closeted thing, and when I got busted, it was like, I don't want to get found out, so there was this fear, yeah.
And Grace?
I think that's, well, yeah, and I think there's an innate sense of that fear, isn't it? That even at that early age, there's something wrong about what you're doing. But I mean, I think and I grew up, in the 60s, so, and that was sort of the era when in the media we started seeing people like Christine Yorkson and April Ashley, so these were those really high-profile transsexuals, so they were kind of sensationalised. So on the one hand, it was like, I saw this sort of stuff in the paper, and it was like, now I know that maybe, I can relate to somebody actually in our sort of somewhere in the world.
Sure, yeah.
But equally it was like, it was still very overawing as well, that people had to go to such lengths, and then they would be sensationalised in the newspapers for changing their sex or becoming affirmed in their sex, and their gender.
So I'm a little bit younger than you, and I had feelings at about 10 years old. And I grew up in the 70s and the early 80s, and I have that same feeling of when I saw some people in the media, it was like, I'm not the only person in the world that feels this way. Yeah. So yeah, okay, I feel weird and strange and dealing with homophobic family, the same sort of thing that you were talking about. But I wasn't the only one. It's like, I'm not the only one. There are other people like this. And yeah, the feelings of shame, and you do everything you possibly can to avoid this because... that's what societies did in those days. But how about you, Simona? Were there role models in the media that you saw that helped you in some ways? I suppose the music videos you were referring to?
Yeah, I mean, Boy George and Marilyn. I mean, I was shocked that Boy George was a man. I was like, oh, really? And then Marilyn was like such a dude, and I was just kind of like, oh, really, I didn't really, I don't know, I kind of, there was a sense of this sort of ownership of, I guess, of a feminine persona, and this idea that it was sort of put on for 2 hours on a Saturday night or something like that was something that I resisted, because I mean, I wanted to be a female musician and be like, like the clothes I got out of bed in and well, you know, it wasn't something I put on for 2 hours on a Saturday night, you know, and then just went back into like being a dude, you know. It was kind of, for me, that was actually quite a difficult thing for me to come to terms with, that I've only really probably come to terms with. And that does date back to the 80s, and I guess, you know, people like probably Anthony Hegarty, Anthony and the Johnsons is probably like the first trans role model who, you know, it just lives that life and is not this, oh, is that what you do, you know, for 2 hours, you know, it's that kind of, you know.
What about you, Gem? Was there like, you're a little bit younger than
Yeah,
some of us.
I was born in the early 80s, so I don't feel that young, but okay. But I guess similar, it was, I guess I saw a lot of trans stories from the early 90s about young people transitioning. So that was my initial, I guess, idea of what trans was. But it wasn't until I saw drag kings on stage and I thought, so it's girls who dress up as guys. But then again, I didn't want to take the clothes off afterwards. I wanted to be in that in-between. So look like a guy, but you're still a girl, if that makes any sense.
I think as you follow on from that as well, I mean, I found as I sort of moved towards adolescence, things kind of changed for me as well, in that, you know, your naivety about both your gender and your sexuality sort of starts to come into play as well. And I was a male, and I still am heterosexual in that respect, depending on how you look at me. So I fancied girls. But I also went through a period of, like, obviously, you know, all these hormones flying around and intensely fancying sort of girls, but actually also, like, kind of wanting to identify with them as well, and, like, the sense of wanting to look like that and be like that and be part of that community.
I wanted to ask about what the responses are that you get. So once you first decide, okay, I feel like this and I'm going to start telling people, and if you could just quickly run through briefly, like, family and friends and work colleagues, what sort of responses did you get? Simona, do you want to go first?
Well, I mean, the worst thing I think that happened was that I told my mother and she was kind of distraught about it, and I thought from that moment on, I thought coming out eventually is really going to be a difficult thing for her. But I think the hardest thing was, you know, going to a counsellor, and the counsellor just going over to a book and saying, oh, you've got a transvestic fetish, and then just totally just put me into this thing that I will be, you know, inappropriately sexualised and lonely for the rest of my life.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, it was like family was okay. It was more the trans community that I felt I wanted acceptance, and I was very disappointed that I didn't get recognised as a genderqueer person.
Oh, look, I've generally found I've kind of picked very carefully how and when I tell people. So that's very strategic as to how you do it.
I think that's a great piece of advice. I did the same thing, planned it in a lot of detail, and it's been fabulous for me. I'm Sammy Cameron. Thank you to Simona, Gem and Grace for joining us today. You've been watching Transmission. Please send us your feedback. See you next time.